This session will describe the function of Codex committees from two perspectives. The function of Codex subsidiary bodies, including their composition and the role and responsibilities of host countries, and the provision of guidance on how meetings are conducted, including how members and observers intervene and other procedural issues. Now, this is a reminder of the Codex structure, which, as you recall, is made up of 4 different types of committees. General subject committees, also referred to as horizontal committees, which establish standards and guidelines applicable to all foods. Commodity committees, which are known as vertical committees, which prepare standards for specific food commodities. FAO/WHO coordinating committees, through which regions or groups of countries coordinate food standards activities in the region, including the development of regional standards. And ad hoc intergovernmental task forces, which are time-limited and prepare standards and guidelines on specific issues. The main function of Codex subsidiary bodies, except the coordinating committees, is to develop standards. And standards, guidelines, as well as recommendations relevant to their specific areas of focus. Specifically, Codex subsidiary bodies are expected to draw up a list of priorities amongst the subjects and products within their terms of reference, to consider the safety and quality elements to be covered, to consider the types and scope of products to be covered by standards, for example, whether materials for further processing into food should be covered, and to prepare draft Codex standards, including guidelines, codes of practice that take into account the standard setting methodology adopted by the Codex Alimentarius Commission. Committees are also tasked to report to each session of the Codex Alimentarius Commission on the progress of their work and, where necessary, on any difficulties caused by their terms of reference, together with suggestions for their amendments. Committees are also tasked to review and revise existing standards and related texts on a periodic basis to ensure that they are consistent with the current scientific knowledge and other relevant information. The main functions of coordinating committees are to promote mutual exchange of information on proposed regulatory initiatives and problems that may be arising from food control, to promote the use of Codex standards in the region and monitor the use of adopted Codex texts. But they are also tasked to exercise the general coordination in the preparation of standards related to the specific region or the groups of countries that the coordinating committee is asked to work within. It should be noted that Codex committees, whether horizontal, vertical, and Codex task forces, function and follow the same procedures. The main difference is that a Codex task force is time-bound. All Codex committees consist of the following members: a chairperson, a body of members, meaning those Codex member countries that are present at the meeting, and observers who have speaking privileges but not voting rights, meaning that observers do not participate in the decision-making process, rather express their views on a text or on a topic that is being discussed. We also have a secretariat and a host country that facilitates the work of the committee. Now, as required and depending on the issues to be discussed, representatives of FAO and/or WHO may attend a committee session to support the work of the committee. Most commonly, FAO and WHO officers will be present at CCFH to present the work on GEMRA, at CCFA, so the Food Additives Committee, to present the work on GFA, and will be present also at CCPR to present the work on JMPR. On other occasions, and as requested by committees, FAO and WHO officers will attend a committee meeting, for example, during the 20th session of the Codex Committee on Fats and Oils, where the committee requested FAO and WHO to provide scientific advice on the development of criteria for acceptable previous cargoes. At the regional coordinating committees, FAO and WHO generally make an effort as well to attend. The Codex Alimentarius Commission designates as a host country of a committee a member country of the Commission which has indicated its willingness to accept the financial and other responsibilities associated with hosting the committee. The member country concerned is responsible for appointing the chairperson of the committee from among its own nationals. Although a committee at any session may appoint one or more rapporteurs amongst the delegates present, most committees have a national secretariat provided by the host country. Members of Codex committees are those members of the Commission who have responded to the invitation of the Director General of FAO or WHO, advising of their desire to participate in the committee. Countries which are members of the Commission are entitled to apply for membership of Codex committees of interest to them. This notification is achieved by registering to participate in the committee in response to the invitation through the online registration system that is made available for that purpose. Membership of FAO-WHO coordinating committees is open only to the members of the Commission that belong to the region or the group of countries concerned. Although other Codex member countries, so not from that region, may also attend a committee as observers in a region that is different from theirs. So essentially they would attend the meetings of the FAO-WHO coordinating committees other than those to the region to which they are geographically belonging. For example, Canada, as a member of the FAO-WHO Regional Coordinating Committee for North America and the Southwest Pacific, may attend as an observer a meeting of the FAO-WHO Regional Coordinating Committee for Africa. In order to do this, Codex members must notify the host government and the Codex Secretariat by proceeding with the online registration when they want to attend a regional committee of which they are not part of. They would be registered as an observer country to that session. Now, only committee members can make decisions on issues under consideration. Codex regions are different from FAO and WHO zoning of countries. Codex member countries that are located on the boundary between two regions can choose to which region they wish to belong. International organizations with official observer status in Codex, whether governmental or non-governmental, may also participate in meetings of the various Codex committees and task forces, as well as in working groups that are established under these committees. Observers may make interventions, they may submit written comments, but only members, meaning countries, can make decisions, so essentially can vote. Countries that are not members of the Commission, but are members of the UN, of FAO or WHO may also attend Codex Committee meetings as observers. Meetings of Codex subsidiary bodies are served by a Secretariat. The principal Secretariat is the Codex Secretariat, that is the international Secretariat based in Rome, who coordinates the documentation for the meeting, advises the chairperson of the committee on technical and procedural matters, and prepares the report of the meeting. In addition, there is a host country Secretariat or a national Secretariat who assists the Codex Secretariat in coordinating documentation for the meeting and is also responsible for the logistical aspects of the meeting, like the meeting venue, the security, the conference services, the visa facilitation, the registration of participants, the document printing if that is applicable, as well as the preparation of the list of participants. Let us review some of the host government responsibilities. The host government has the responsibility to ensure that it has all the administrative support staff needed to be able to work easily in the languages used during the session of the committee. The host country has also at its disposal, or should have at least at its disposal, adequate word processing and document reproduction equipment where applicable. The host country should also provide simultaneous interpretation from and into all languages that are used during a session of a committee meeting. The host country should make available the various services of a translator if a report of a session is to be adopted in more than one of the working languages of the committee. In the case of coordinating committees, the last two items, so essentially the translation and the interpretation, are the responsibility of the Codex Secretariat and not the National Host Secretariat. The members of the Secretariat from the host country support the work of the Codex Secretariat and are not members of the host country's official delegation. Their primary function is to facilitate the functioning of the session, and it is important that they are perceived by all members, by all attendees to that committee meeting as being neutral and not influencing the outcome of the discussions. Scheduling of meetings of Codex committees is done by the Codex Secretariat in Rome in consultation with the Codex contact point of the country hosting the various Codex committees. The schedule of Codex sessions is tabled for consideration and endorsement by the Commission and is generally based on a biannual planning cycle. The Secretariat has a responsibility for the preparation and distribution of meeting documentation. The main meeting documents consist of the following: an invitation, the provisional agenda, and the working papers. Now, let us discuss who may attend a Codex meeting. Participation to Codex meetings is open to delegations representing member countries and organizations with official observer status with Codex. The meetings of Codex committees and task forces are also held in public, unless the committee decides otherwise. All Codex sessions follow the same format. There may be a formal opening of the session as decided by the host country. There is also generally a reception in the evening of the first day of the meeting, where government officials of the host country may also make a formal address to the participants in the committee meeting. After the formal opening, if applicable, the chairperson proceeds to the adoption of the provisional agenda and invites observations from members of the committee concerning this provisional agenda. Any member country may request the addition of additional items to the provisional agenda. In light of such observations, the chairperson requests the committee to adopt the provisional agenda or the amended agenda. Generally, the member who may request the addition of an item to the agenda would do so during the adoption process. so the adoption of the agenda process. It is recommended, however, that prior to the meeting, informal discussions and informal contact be made with the Codex Secretariat, advising the Secretariat of the intent of the addition of this item or the discussion of the additional item. And if necessary, a background document may be prepared and forwarded to the Codex Secretariat so that the committee members have sufficient information to consider the item. While the request to add the item to the agenda is made during the adoption of the provisional agenda, issues added are normally not discussed until the item related to other business. Chairpersons of Codex committees are expected to ensure that all comments on the standards being elaborated are fully discussed. Chairpersons are also expected to ensure that the committee considers the written comments of members not present at the session and that all issues are put clearly to the committee. This is an example of why it is important for countries to submit written comments on issues they feel are significant to them, even if they cannot actually attend the committee meeting. The committee can only consider and reference comments actually made or submitted in advance in writing. And in fact, if other countries would refer to support the views of a country not present, that can only happen if that country had submitted written comments on the item of question. Now, how can members express their country's views at a meeting? Members and observers are permitted to intervene on issues under consideration by the committee. They indicate their desire to speak by holding up their country or their organization name plate or placing it on one end of their table. If in some committees, delegates can indicate their desire to speak by pushing a button at their seat. This places their country or organization's names on a computer screen in front of the chairperson. The protocol states that members would speak before observers, and delegations speak only when acknowledged by the chairperson. Normally, it is the head delegate who has the right to speak on behalf of a member or an observer. But with the chair permission, another member of the delegation may speak on technical matters and as proposed by the head delegate. At all times, comments are directed to the chair and never directly addressed to another delegation, even if it is in response to another delegation's comment. There are no precise rules within Codex regarding the number and duration of interventions. However, by convention, the general practice is to intervene only once on any particular issue, although a second intervention may be permitted at the discretion of the chair, generally to clarify a point or to reply to a question raised by another delegation. Interventions should be as short and clear as possible. 2 to 3 minutes generally is a reasonable maximum time limit. And one should speak slowly enough to allow for good interpretation. It should be borne in mind that all interventions are meant to be interpreted simultaneously into several other languages, with the result that lengthy interventions risk being misunderstood by those who do not comprehend the language of the speaker. Very long interventions are difficult to follow, and other delegations may lose their concentration, with the result that the point that was to be made may be missed, therefore diminishing the effectiveness of the intervention. At some committees, with a very heavy agenda and time limitations, it's not unusual for the chairperson to ask speakers to make their interventions as short as possibly be, or to specify an agreed time limit, often 2 minutes. Consensus is a very important aspect of standards development in Codex. It is important to note that voting at a committee level is extremely rare. The chairperson tries always to arrive at a consensus. If consensus cannot be reached, the usual practice is, for example, to defer the issue for discussion at the next session, or to establish a working group to address those points where consensus cannot be reached. Sometimes we refer the issue to the Commission for guidance, or we recommend to the Commission that work on the issue be suspended or even discontinued altogether. Those would be the extreme cases where consensus could not be achieved. At appropriate intervals during the discussions of each agenda item, the chairperson ought to summarize the discussion by stating what appears to be the generally acceptable view and asking delegates whether they have any objection to it being recorded as the decision or the recommendation of the committee. Let us discuss the various other measures that we could consider to facilitate consensus. One of the measures is, of course, to refrain from submitting proposals in the step process where the scientific basis is not well established on current data and where it is necessary to carry out further studies in order to clarify a particular controversial issue. Another possibility would be to provide for thorough discussions and documentations of the issues at the meetings of the committees concerned. We could also think of organizing informal meetings of the parties concerned where the disagreements may arise, provided that the objectives of any such meeting are clearly defined by the committee concerned and that participation is open to all interested delegations and observers in order to preserve transparency. We could also think of redefining, where possible, the scope of the subject matter being considered for elaboration of standards in order to cut out those specific issues where we know that consensus could not be reached. Another option is to provide that matters are not progressed from one step to another until all relevant concerns have been taken into account and adequate compromises have been worked out. We could also emphasize to committees and their chairpersons that matters should not be passed on to the Commission until such time as consensus has been well achieved at the technical committee level. Facilitating the increased involvement and participation of developing countries can also contribute to achieving consensus. Although consensus has not been defined by Codex, it is generally agreed that it does not necessarily mean that everybody is in total agreement. Consensus does not mean unanimous decision. There may be occasions where a decision is taken by the committee where one or two countries may still not agree with that decision, but they will not block the adoption of the decision. In such circumstances, those countries may request that their objections to the decision and the reasons why be recorded in the report of the committee. And as mentioned, the objection would not mean that the decision of the committee would not be carried. A draft report of the proceedings is prepared by the Codex Secretariat for consideration by the committee on the final day of the session that the committee meets. The report is reviewed and adopted by the committee paragraph by paragraph or section by section. The review and adoption process provides countries with an opportunity to ensure that the report is accurate and reflects their interventions correctly. It's not an opportunity to reopen discussion on agenda items. What has been said and decided cannot be revisited at the report review. It is not necessary at this stage to highlight editorial errors in translated texts. If there are such errors in translated text, it is best if the head delegate advises the committee that errors in the text have been noted and that a note proposing alternate text will be submitted to the Codex Secretariat. All reports contain a table at the end of the report before Appendix 1, showing clearly in summary form standards considered at the session and the steps they have reached, standards at any step of the procedure, the consideration of which has been postponed or which are held in abeyance, and the steps which they have reached. Also, we will see new standards proposed for consideration and the probable time of their consideration at step 2 and the responsibility for drawing up the first draft. The next action required is also documented as well as the relevant paragraphs in the report which describes the discussion. Once adopted, the draft report becomes the official record of the committee session. When requesting an amendment to the draft report, it is important to make a concrete proposal for changes, including the provision of alternative text if applicable. The following appendices are normally attached to the report. So we see a list of participants with full postal and email information, telephone and sometimes fax numbers. We will see the complete text of draft standards with an indication of the step in the procedure that has been reached. And in an effort to write a concise report, it is common practice not to record the country names, but instead to record as correctly as possible the point being made. So essentially, we do not see attribution to the country of the points being made. In summary, these are the requirements that need to be observed in a Codex Committee report. Committee decisions in the report should be clearly stated. Action taken in regard to economic impact statements should be fully recorded. All decisions on draft standards should be accompanied by an indication of the step in the procedure that the standard have reached. If action has to be taken before the next meeting of the committee, the nature of the action, who is to take it, and when the action must be completed should be clearly stated. Where matters require attention by other Codex committees, this should also be clearly stated. If the report is of any length, an executive summary of points agreed and the action to be taken should be included at the beginning of the report. The workload of many Codex committees has grown to the extent that there is a need to carry out work between regularly scheduled sessions of the committee. The committee may therefore establish a working group which will work between sessions, either by electronic means or by actually meeting, meaning through a physical working group meeting. Working groups may also be established during a committee session to address specific points in an attempt to reach consensus. Participation to a working group is open to all members and observers of the Commission. When establishing a working group, committees are expected to give preference to electronic working groups, taking into consideration the difficulty experienced by developing countries in participating in physical groups. It is acknowledged, however, that for some complex issues, it's not possible to resolve these issues through electronic working groups, and you would need the dynamics of face-to-face meetings to be successful. When trying to reach a decision on the best mechanism for working groups, the following considerations need to be looked at: financial support that may be required from the host country, the complexity of the work to be discussed by the working group, access by participants to electronic means or the place of the physical meeting, and any language considerations. It should be noted that some physical working groups will undertake some preliminary work prior to a physical meeting of the committee. The rules of procedure and the guidelines that govern the work of Codex committees also apply to the work of a working group. Unless decided otherwise by the committee establishing a working group, Participation in the working group is open to all members and observers of the Codex Alimentarius Commission. The committee will designate a host country for the working group, which will not necessarily be the host country of the committee. The terms of reference of the working group should clearly state the objective to be achieved, the languages to be used, and the time by which the work is expected to be completed. The conclusions of the working group shall be presented to the committee for consideration in the form of a working group report, usually shared through a circular letter. The working group itself cannot make decisions on behalf of the committee. Now let us discuss some considerations around the host country of a working group. The country responsible for the working group will need to supply a chairperson, a secretariat, and in the case of a physical working group, conference facilities. The host is also responsible for all interpretation and translation services in all working languages of the committee, unless decided otherwise by the committee. Now let us summarize what we reviewed in this session. The main function of Codex subsidiary bodies is to develop standards, guidelines, and recommendations relevant to their specific subject area. All Codex committees consist of a chairperson, members who make decisions on Codex issues, observers who have speaking privileges but not voting rights, and a secretariat and a host government that facilitates the work of the committee. All Codex sessions follow the same format. The chairperson always tries to arrive at a consensus, which does not necessarily mean unanimity. Normally, a delegation should intervene only once on any particular issue, and interventions should be as short and clear as possibly be, generally a maximum of 2-minute interventions. At the end of each session, a final report is drawn up and becomes the official record of the committee session. When the workload is too extensive, the committee may establish a working group, either electronic or physical, which will work between sessions. This summarizes the general operations and participation into Codex committee meetings.